The scar that ran from Rebecca Keller's right eyebrow to her temple had been there for 7 years, but it might as well have been carved fresh yesterday for how deeply she felt. It marked her as unwanted. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the train window, watching the vast Montana wilderness roll past, and wondered if Dalton Irving would take one look at her face and send her right back to Philadelphia on the next available rail car. The advertisement had been simple enough. Rancher seeking wife. Must be hardworking, honest, and willing to build a life in Wallace, Montana. No prior experience with ranch life necessary. There had been no mention of beauty, no requirements about unblemished skin or perfect features, but Rebecca knew how the world worked. She had learned that lesson when Thomas Whitmore, her fiancé of 2 years, had taken one look at her after the carriage accident and declared he could not possibly marry a woman who looked like she had been in a knife fight. That had been in 1873. It was now 1880, and Rebecca was 25 years old with no prospects, no family left to speak of, and a growing certainty that she would spend the rest of her days as a burden to her aunt's household in Philadelphia. When her cousin Martha had shown her the mail-order bride advertisement in the newspaper, Rebecca had stared at it for 3 days before finally, desperately, putting pen to paper. Dalton Irving had written back within 2 weeks. His letters were brief but kind, detailing his ranch outside of Wallace, explaining that he needed a partner more than he needed a decoration. He raised cattle and horses, he wrote, and the work was hard but honest. He was 30 years old, he had never been married, and he promised to treat his wife with respect and provide for her to the best of his ability. Not once in their correspondence had Rebecca mentioned the scar. She had told herself it was an oversight, that she would explain it in the next letter. But the next letter came and went, and so did the one after that, until suddenly she was on a train heading west with a carpetbag containing everything she owned and a secret that felt like a stone in her stomach. The train pulled into Wallace just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that Rebecca had never seen back east. The town was smaller than she had imagined, just a collection of wooden buildings along a single main street, but it had a certain rough charm to it. She gathered her belongings and stepped onto the platform, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone around her could hear it. There were perhaps a dozen people waiting on the platform, mostly men in worn work clothes, a few women with baskets on their arms, and one man who stood a head taller than the rest. He was lean and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of summer grass. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously, and when he saw Rebecca step off the train, his whole face lit up with a smile that made her breath catch. That smile would fade soon enough, she thought, as soon as he got a good look at her. "Miss Keller," he called out, starting toward her. Rebecca turned her face slightly to the left, an old habit that kept her scar in shadow. "Mr. Irving, Dalton, please." He reached for her bag, and she caught the scent of leather and pine and something clean and masculine that made her stomach flip. Was the journey all right? "You must be exhausted." "It was long," she admitted, "but not terrible." He gestured toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. "The ranch is about an hour outside of town. I have a room at the boarding house if you would rather rest first, get your bearings." "No, I would prefer to see my new home." The words came out more firmly than she felt. Dalton helped her into the wagon with a gentle hand at her elbow, and Rebecca was acutely aware of how close he was, how he smelled like the outdoors and hard work. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue softly to get the horses moving. They rode in silence for a few minutes. The only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the rhythmic clop of hooves on the dirt road. The sun was sinking lower now, and Rebecca knew she could not keep her face turned away forever. Her heart was racing again, her palms damp inside her gloves. "I should tell you something," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Dalton glanced over at her. "All right." Rebecca took a deep breath and turned to face him fully, tilting her chin up so that the fading sunlight fell directly across her scar. "I was in an accident 7 years ago. A carriage overturned. I was engaged at the time, but my fiancé decided he could not marry someone who looked like this." She watched Dalton's face carefully, waiting for the flicker of disgust, the tightening around his mouth, the sudden coolness in his eyes. Instead, he simply looked at her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "That must have hurt," he said quietly. "Not the accident, him leaving." Rebecca felt her throat tighten. "I should have told you in my letters. I know I should have. If you want to take me back to town, I understand." Dalton pulled the wagon to a stop. He set the reins down and turned to face her more fully. "Miss Keller, Rebecca, I asked for a wife who was hardworking, honest, and willing to build a life with me. From your letters, you seem to be all those things. I did not ask for perfection, and I do not expect it. But surely you expected someone who was not damaged." "We are all damaged in one way or another," Dalton said. His voice was gentle but firm. "I lost both my parents to fever when I was 17. Spent the last 13 years building a ranch with my own hands, working until my back screamed and my hands bled. I am not looking for a china doll to put on a shelf. I am looking for a partner." Rebecca stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception, but all she saw was earnest sincerity. "You really mean that?" "I do." He picked up the reins again. "Now, let me get you home before it gets too dark to see the road." The ranch appeared as they crested a hill, and Rebecca felt a small flutter of something that might have been hope. The house was modest but well built, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and glass windows that caught the last rays of sunlight. There was a large barn to the left, a smaller building that looked like a bunkhouse, and several corrals where horses were grazing peacefully. "It is not much," Dalton said, "but it is home." "It is beautiful," Rebecca said, and she meant it. He helped her down from the wagon, and this time his hands lingered just a moment longer at her waist. "I will show you to your room. I thought, that is, we could have separate rooms until you are comfortable. I know this is all very sudden." Rebecca felt a rush of gratitude. "Thank you." The inside of the house was clean and simply furnished. Dalton had clearly made an effort, she noticed. There were fresh wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table, and the wooden floors had been recently swept. He led her upstairs to a small bedroom with a neatly made bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the rolling hills. "The water pump is out back," he said. "I will bring up some fresh water for you to wash up. There is stew on the stove if you are hungry." "Dalton," Rebecca said softly. He turned back to look at her. "Thank you for not turning me away." Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she could not quite name. "I would never do that, Rebecca. You took a tremendous leap of faith coming all the way out here to marry a stranger. The least I can do is make you feel welcome." That night, Rebecca lay in her new bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Montana wilderness. Somewhere nearby, a coyote howled. The wind whispered through the eaves, and downstairs she could hear Dalton moving quietly around, banking the fire, checking the locks. She had expected many things from this arrangement. Tolerance, perhaps, polite distance, a business partnership at best. What she had not expected was kindness, and it unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. The next morning, Rebecca woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She dressed quickly in one of her simple work dresses and made her way downstairs to find Dalton already at the stove. "I hope I did not wake you," he said. "I am used to getting up with the sun. It is fine. I should be getting used to ranch hours anyway." She glanced around the kitchen, noting the dishes stacked by the basin, the supplies neatly organized on the shelves. "What can I do to help?" "You just got here yesterday. Take some time to settle in." "I would rather be useful." Dalton studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Can you cook?" "I can. Nothing fancy, but I know my way around a kitchen." "That is more than I can say for myself." "I am barely competent with bacon and beans." He gestured to the stove. "If you want to take over breakfast, I will go see to the horses. We can talk about a routine once we both have some food in us." They fell into an easy rhythm over the next few days. Rebecca took over the cooking and the household chores, grateful to have something to occupy her hands and mind. Dalton worked from dawn until dusk, tending to the cattle and horses, mending fences, and completing the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running. In the evenings, they would eat together at the kitchen table, and Dalton would tell her about the ranch, about the land, about his plans for the future. He never once stared at her scar, never flinched when she turned her face toward him. In fact, he seemed to look her straight in the eyes every time they spoke, as if the scar did not exist at all. It should have been a relief. Instead, it made Rebecca feel strangely exposed, as if he could see straight through to all the broken parts she kept hidden. On her 5th day at the ranch, Rebecca was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard a horse approaching at speed. She turned to see a young man riding up, his face flushed with urgency. "Mr. Irving," he called out, "we have got a problem down at the south pasture." Dalton emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. "What kind of problem, Tommy?" "Fence is down and some of the cattle got out. Looks like something spooked them in the night. We need all hands to round them up before they get too far." "I will be right there." Dalton glanced at Rebecca, his expression apologetic. "I am sorry, this might take most of the day." "Go," she said. "I will manage here." But after Dalton rode off with Tommy, Rebecca found herself at loose ends. The house was already clean, the bread was rising, and there was nothing to do but wait. She wandered around the property, getting a better sense of the layout, and eventually found herself at the horse corral. There were 5 horses in total, all of them beautiful creatures with glossy coats and intelligent eyes. One of them, a gray mare with a white blaze on her nose, came over to the fence and nudged at Rebecca's hand. "Hello there," Rebecca murmured, stroking the mare's soft nose. "Aren't you a beauty?" "That is Juniper," a voice said behind her. Rebecca turned to see an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "She is the sweetest horse on the ranch. I am Pete, by the way. I work for Mr. Irving." "Rebecca Keller. I mean Rebecca Irving. Or I will be once we are properly married. Heard about you. Welcome to the ranch, madam." Pete tipped his hat. "You know how to ride?" Rebecca shook her head. "I never learned." "Well, if you are going to be living out here, you will need to know. Can't always count on having a wagon handy." He studied her for a moment. "I could teach you if you like. Juniper here would be perfect for a beginner." "I would not want to impose." "No imposition. I have got a few hours before I need to head out and help with the roundup. Might as well make myself useful." That was how Dalton found them when he returned at dusk. Dusty and tired, but successful. Rebecca was sitting astride Juniper, her skirts hiked up in a way that would have scandalized her aunt back in Philadelphia, walking the mare in slow circles around the corral while Pete called out instructions. "Heels down. Good. Now ease up on the reins a bit, let her have her head." Dalton leaned against the fence and watched, a smile spreading across his face. Rebecca caught sight of him and felt her cheeks flush, suddenly self-conscious. "I know I must look ridiculous," she called out. "You look like a natural," Dalton replied. "How long have you been at this?" "A few hours," Pete said with obvious pride. "She is a quick learner." Rebecca brought Juniper to a halt and carefully dismounted, her legs wobbling slightly. Dalton was there immediately, steadying her with a hand at her elbow. "Easy there. You will be sore tomorrow." "It was worth it." Rebecca looked up at him, her eyes bright with excitement, and for a moment neither of them moved. Dalton's hand was still on her arm, and Rebecca could feel the warmth of it through her sleeve. Something passed between them, a flicker of connection that made her breath catch. Dalton cleared his throat and stepped back. "I am glad you are learning." Pete is right. It is an important skill out here. That night over dinner, Dalton told her about the roundup, how they had managed to get all the cattle back safely and repair the fence. Rebecca told him about her day, about learning to ride, and he listened with genuine interest, asking questions and encouraging her. "I was thinking," he said after they had finished eating, "that we should probably make things official soon. Get married properly, I mean." "Unless you would rather wait longer." Rebecca set down her coffee cup. "I think sooner would be better than later. It does not feel right living here unmarried. We could go into town this Saturday. The preacher does services in the morning, and he could marry us after if we ask." "All right." Rebecca's heart was racing again, but this time it was not entirely from fear. "Saturday it is." The wedding was a simple affair, held in the small church in Wallace with Pete and a few of Dalton's other ranch hands as witnesses. Rebecca wore her best dress, a dark blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and Dalton wore a clean shirt and a string tie that he kept adjusting nervously. The preacher was a portly man named Reverend Carson, who seemed more interested in getting through the ceremony quickly than in making it particularly meaningful. But Rebecca did not mind. When Dalton took her hand and spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure, and when he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, she felt tears prick at her eyes. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Carson announced, and Dalton leaned in slowly, giving Rebecca plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to. She did not. His lips brushed against hers, soft and gentle, and Rebecca felt something warm unfurl in her chest. They had a celebratory dinner at the boarding house, where Mrs. Patterson, the proprietor, had prepared a special meal of roast chicken and apple pie. Pete made a toast that was equal parts heartfelt and amusing, and the other ranch hands cheered. Rebecca found herself laughing more than she had in years, caught up in the warmth and camaraderie of these people who were quickly becoming her friends. As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, Dalton reached over and took her hand. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that nothing has to change tonight. We can take things as slow as you need." Rebecca looked down at their joined hands, at the gold band glinting on her finger. "What if I do not want to take things slow?" Dalton pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "Rebecca, I do not want you to feel obligated." "I do not feel obligated. I feel like I am married to a man who has shown me nothing but kindness and respect since the moment I arrived. A man who makes me feel like I matter." She took a shaky breath. "A man I am starting to care for quite a lot." "I have cared for you since your first letter," Dalton admitted. "You wrote about wanting a fresh start, about being willing to work hard for a new life, and I thought, this is a woman with courage. And then I met you, and you were even braver than I imagined." "I am not brave. I am terrified most of the time. Bravery is not the absence of fear, Rebecca. It is doing what needs to be done in spite of it." He cupped her face with one hand, his thumb gently tracing the edge of her scar. "You are the bravest woman I know." They kissed again then, deeper this time, and Rebecca felt the last of her walls begin to crumble. When they finally pulled apart, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "Let me take you home, wife." That night, in the bedroom they now shared, Dalton proved to Rebecca in the most tender and thorough way that she was not damaged or broken or unworthy of love. He touched her like she was precious, like every part of her mattered, and when she cried, he kissed away her tears and held her close. "I have got you," he murmured against her hair. "I will always have you." The weeks that followed were a revelation. Rebecca threw herself into ranch life with determination, learning to ride better, helping with the garden, even assisting with the horses when Dalton needed an extra pair of hands. She discovered that she had a knack for working with the animals, that they responded to her calm, patient manner. Dalton, for his part, seemed determined to make her feel loved every single day. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow. He carved her a set of wooden spoons when he noticed her struggling with his old, worn ones. He taught her to shoot a rifle, standing behind her with his arms around her, guiding her aim while she tried to concentrate on anything other than the feel of his body against hers. But it was the small things that undid her completely. The way he always made sure her coffee was ready in the morning. The way he would brush the dust off her shoulders when she came in from working outside. The way he looked at her sometimes, like she was the most fascinating thing he had ever seen. One evening in late June, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Dalton said, "Tell me about Philadelphia, about your life before you came here." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. It was not a happy life. "After the accident, after Thomas left, I felt like I was just existing, not really living. My aunt was kind enough to take me in, but I knew I was a burden. And everywhere I went, people would stare at my scar and whisper. It made me feel like I was something broken that needed to be hidden away." "You are not broken," Dalton said firmly. "You never were. I know that now, or at least I am starting to believe it." She looked over at him. "You have been very patient with me. I am not being patient. I am being a husband." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Rebecca, I need you to understand something. When I look at you, I do not see a scar. I see a woman who makes my house feel like a home. I see someone who works harder than anyone I know, who is kind to the horses and thoughtful with the hands. I see the woman I am falling in love with." Rebecca's breath caught. "You are falling in love with me." "I think I have been falling in love with you since you stepped off that train and tried to hide your face in the shadows." He turned to look at her fully. "You do not have to say it back. I just wanted you to know." "I love you," Rebecca said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone. I did not think anyone would ever want me enough to make me feel this way. But Dalton, I love you so much it scares me sometimes." He pulled her into his arms and she went willingly, burying her face against his neck. "Don't be scared. I am not going anywhere. Promise me," she whispered. "Promise me you will not change your mind." "Rebecca." He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. "I promise you, on everything I hold sacred, that I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are loved, that you are wanted, that you are the best thing that ever happened to me." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and hope and lingering fear into it, and he kissed her back just as fiercely. The sunset blazed on around them, painting the sky in impossible colors, but neither of them noticed. They were too wrapped up in each other in this moment, in the promise of a future neither of them had dared to dream of. Summer gave way to fall, and the ranch hummed with activity as they prepared for winter. Dalton hired 2 more hands to help with the work, and Rebecca found herself managing a household that felt more and more like hers with each passing day. She canned vegetables from the garden, mended clothes, and even learned to help with the butchering when it came time to slaughter a steer. She also discovered that she was pregnant. The realization came on a crisp October morning when Rebecca found herself unable to stomach the smell of coffee. She had been feeling tired lately, emotional in a way that was not typical for her, and when she counted back the weeks, her suspicions were confirmed. She told Dalton that evening after dinner, blurting it out before she could lose her nerve. "I am going to have a baby." Dalton had been reaching for his coffee cup and he froze, his hand suspended in midair. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor." He set the cup down carefully, then stood up and crossed to where she was sitting. He knelt in front of her, taking both her hands in his. "Are you happy about this, are you?" Rebecca countered, searching his face. "I am terrified and thrilled in equal measure," he admitted. "But yes, Rebecca, I am happy. I am so incredibly happy." She let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. "Good, because I am too." They made the trip to Wallace the following week to see the doctor, who confirmed what Rebecca already knew. She was about 2 months along, due in early May. The doctor, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Evelyn Hayes who had set up practice in Wallace 5 years earlier, gave Rebecca a thorough examination and a list of instructions. "Get plenty of rest, eat well, and do not overdo it," Dr. Hayes said. "First babies can be tricky, but you are young and healthy. I see no reason this should not go smoothly." As winter set in, Dalton became even more attentive if that was possible. He insisted Rebecca rest more, took over some of her heavier chores, and worried constantly about whether she was eating enough. Rebecca found it equal parts endearing and exasperating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one snowy afternoon in December. "I can still help with the cooking." "I know you can. I just want to make sure you are taking care of yourself." "I am taking care of myself. You are just hovering." Dalton had the grace to look sheepish. "I am sorry. I have never done this before. I do not know how to not worry." Rebecca softened. She crossed to where he was standing by the window and wrapped her arms around his waist. "I love that you worry, but you need to trust that I will tell you if something is wrong. I promise I will not push myself too hard. I am going to hold you to that." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I just want you both to be safe." Christmas was a quiet affair, just the two of them and Pete, who had nowhere else to go. Rebecca made a feast of roasted chicken, potatoes, and dried apple pie, and they exchanged small gifts by the fire. Dalton gave Rebecca a beautiful shawl he had ordered from a catalog, and she gave him a new pair of work gloves she had sewn herself. "They are perfect," he said, trying them on. "How did you know my old ones were falling apart?" "Because I pay attention." She smiled at him. "Besides, I have to keep my husband's hands warm, don't I?" Pete gave them a hand-carved cradle he had been secretly working on for weeks, and Rebecca burst into tears at the thoughtfulness of it. Dalton had to assure Pete several times that she was crying because she was happy, not upset. Winter deepened, and the ranch settled into a quiet rhythm. There were still chores to be done, animals to be fed, but the pace was slower, more manageable. Rebecca spent her days knitting baby clothes and preparing the small room next to theirs to be a nursery. Dalton spent his evenings reading to her from whatever books and newspapers he could get his hands on, his voice a comforting rumble in the firelit room. In February, a blizzard hit that lasted 3 days. The snow piled up to the windows, and the wind howled like a living thing. Dalton and Pete had to dig tunnels to the barn to feed the animals, and Rebecca kept the fire going and hot food ready for when they came back in, half frozen and exhausted. On the 3rd night, Rebecca woke to find Dalton sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the swirling snow. "What is wrong?" she mumbled, still half asleep. "Nothing, just listening to make sure the roof holds." Rebecca sat up and wrapped her arms around him from behind. "Come back to bed, you need rest too." "I will. I just need to make sure you are safe. We are safe. The house is solid, we have plenty of food and firewood, and we have each other." She pressed a kiss to his shoulder. "Stop worrying so much." He turned to look at her, and in the faint moonlight filtering through the snow-covered window, she could see the love and concern etched on his face. "I cannot help it. You are my whole world, Rebecca. You and this baby. If anything happened to either of you, I do not know what I would do. Nothing is going to happen to us. We are strong, Dalton, both of us." She placed his hand on her swollen belly. "Feel that? That is our baby telling you to relax." As if on cue, the baby kicked against his palm, and Dalton's whole face lit up with wonder. "I felt it. Did you feel that?" "I have been feeling it for weeks," Rebecca said with a laugh. "This child is very active." They spent the rest of the night like that, with Dalton's hand on her belly, feeling their baby move and kick and flip. The blizzard raged on outside, but inside, they were warm and safe and content. By the time the snow finally melted and spring arrived, Rebecca was large and uncomfortable, and more than ready for the pregnancy to be over. Her back ached constantly, her feet were swollen, and she could barely sleep because the baby seemed to think nighttime was the perfect time for acrobatics. Dalton, bless him, did everything he could to make her comfortable. He rubbed her feet, brought her pillows, and listened patiently to her complaints without once suggesting that she was being unreasonable. "I am enormous," she moaned one evening in late April. "I look like I swallowed a watermelon whole." "You look beautiful," Dalton said, helping her settle into a chair. "You are growing our child. Nothing could be more beautiful than that. You are required to say that. You are my husband. I am saying it because it is true." He knelt beside her and took her hand. "Rebecca, you are the strongest, most amazing woman I have ever known. Watching you go through this, seeing how brave you are, it just makes me love you more." Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes, which was not unusual these days. She seemed to cry at the drop of a hat. "How did I get so lucky to find you? I think I am the lucky one." He kissed her hand. "Now, what can I get you? Tea, a pillow, the moon." "The moon might be easier to obtain than getting comfortable right now," she said with a rueful laugh. "But tea sounds nice." The baby came on a warm May morning, 2 weeks later than Dr. Hayes had predicted. Rebecca's labor started just after dawn, a low ache in her back that gradually intensified into waves of pain that took her breath away. Dalton sent Pete racing into town to fetch the doctor while he stayed with Rebecca, holding her hand and trying not to panic. Dr. Hayes arrived within 2 hours, calm and efficient as always. She examined Rebecca and announced that the baby would likely arrive by evening. "Evening?" Dalton repeated, his face pale. "That is hours from now." "First babies take their time," Dr. Hayes said matter-of-factly. "Mr. Irving, I suggest you make yourself useful. Boil some water, gather clean linens, and try not to get in my way." The day passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion. Rebecca labored through the afternoon, with Dalton by her side the entire time, whispering encouragement and wiping the sweat from her forehead. When she screamed, he held her hand and did not flinch, even though she was certain she was crushing his fingers. As the sun began to set, Dr. Hayes announced that it was time to push. Rebecca was beyond exhausted, every muscle in her body screaming in protest, but she gathered what strength she had left and pushed with everything in her. "That is it," Dr. Hayes encouraged. "I can see the head." One more big push, Rebecca. With a final, guttural cry, Rebecca pushed, and suddenly the room was filled with the sound of a baby's wail. Dr. Hayes caught the infant expertly, and after a few tense moments of cleaning and checking, she looked up with a smile. "It is a boy. A healthy, strong boy." Dalton was crying openly now, tears streaming down his face as Dr. Hayes placed the baby in Rebecca's arms. The infant was red-faced and squalling, but to Rebecca, he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching his tiny fingers, his button nose, his shock of dark hair. "We have been waiting for you." Dalton leaned over, his arms around both of them, and pressed kisses to Rebecca's sweaty forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You were magnificent." "You are magnificent. I love you so much." "We need a name," Rebecca said, looking down at their son. "We never did decide on one." They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at this tiny person they had created, Rebecca knew exactly what his name should be. "What about Daniel?" she suggested. "After your father." Dalton's expression crumpled. "Are you certain?" "I am certain. Daniel Irving. It is a strong name for a strong boy." "Daniel Irving," Dalton repeated, testing it out. He looked down at his son with such love and wonder that Rebecca felt her heart might burst. "Welcome to the world, Daniel. We are going to take such good care of you." The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings and diapers. Rebecca had never been so exhausted in her life, but she had also never been so happy. Daniel was a good baby, as babies went, and Dalton was a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk with him when he fussed and changing diapers without complaint. Pete was completely smitten with the baby, carving him toys and singing him off-key lullabies. The other ranch hands made a point of stopping by to see the new addition, bringing small gifts and offering their awkward but heartfelt congratulations. One evening in late June, when Daniel was about 6 weeks old, Rebecca was sitting on the porch with the baby in her arms, watching the sunset. Dalton came out and sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "He is getting bigger already," Dalton observed, touching Daniel's chubby cheek. "I know, it is going by so fast." Rebecca looked up at her husband. "Thank you. For what?" "For everything. For answering my letter. For not turning me away when you saw my scar. For being patient with me. For loving me the way you do." She felt tears welling up again. "For giving me this life." "Rebecca." Dalton turned her face toward him gently. "You gave yourself this life. You were the one who was brave enough to get on that train and come west. You were the one who learned to ride and work the ranch and make this house a home. I am just lucky enough to be along for the journey." "We are both lucky," Rebecca said softly. "I never thought I could be this happy. I never thought anyone could love me like you do." "I will love you until my last breath," Dalton promised. "You and Daniel both. You are my family, my everything." Daniel chose that moment to let out a small, contented sigh, nestling closer to Rebecca's chest. They sat there in the fading light, the three of them, watching the sun sink below the horizon and paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. The years that followed were not without their challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and broken fences. Rebecca lost a pregnancy the following year, a devastating blow that left her grief-stricken for months. But Dalton was there through it all, steady and loving, reminding her that they would get through anything as long as they had each other. 2 years later, Rebecca gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Rose, who had Dalton's green eyes and Rebecca's stubborn determination. The house was suddenly full of noise and laughter and chaos, and Rebecca would not have traded it for anything. Daniel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the horses. The twins were whirlwinds of energy, always getting into mischief and keeping Rebecca on her toes. Dalton expanded the ranch, buying more land and hiring more hands, until they had one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. But no matter how busy they got, Dalton never stopped proving to Rebecca that she was loved. He still brought her wildflowers, still told her she was beautiful, still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton took Rebecca into town for a rare evening out, leaving the children with Pete and his wife, Sarah, whom he had married the previous year. They had dinner at the boarding house, which was much fancier now than it had been when Rebecca first arrived, and then took a walk through the quiet streets of Wallace. "You remember the first time we came into town together?" Dalton asked, his arm around her waist. "How could I forget? I was terrified you were going to take one look at me and send me back east. And instead I married you." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Best decision I ever made, even with all the challenges, the hard years, especially with all the challenges. Rebecca, you have made me happier than I ever thought possible. You have given me a home, a family, a purpose. I fall more in love with you every single day." Rebecca reached up and cupped his face, running her thumb along his jawline. "I love you too, more than I can ever express. You taught me that I was worthy of love, Dalton. You spent every day proving it to me until I finally believed it. You were always worthy of love. I just helped you see what was already there." They kissed under the Montana stars, just as they had done countless times before, but it felt as sweet and new as their first kiss. Because this was not a fairy tale with a simple, happy ending. This was real life, messy and complicated and beautiful, and they were building it together one day at a time. When they returned to the ranch, they found the children asleep in their beds and the house quiet and peaceful. Dalton banked the fire while Rebecca checked on each of the children, tucking blankets around them and pressing soft kisses to their foreheads. In their bedroom, Rebecca stood at the window looking out at the moonlit landscape. Dalton came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I am thinking about how different my life is now from what I imagined it would be, how much better it is than anything I dared to hope for. Do you ever miss Philadelphia? Not even for a second. This is my home. You are my home." They stood there for a long moment, comfortable in each other's presence, watching the wind ripple through the grass and listening to the distant call of an owl. "Dalton," Rebecca said softly. "Yes. Thank you for seeing me. The real me, not just the scar." He turned her around to face him, his expression serious. "Rebecca, I need you to understand something. I have never just seen you in spite of your scar. I have always seen you, all of you, and loved every single part. The scar is part of your story, part of what made you who you are, and who you are is the most incredible woman I have ever known." Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks, but they were happy tears, healing tears. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Dalton said, pulling her close. "We found each other against all odds. That is not luck. That is fate." As the years continued to pass, the ranch thrived and the children grew. Daniel became a skilled horseman, earning his father's pride and his mother's worry in equal measure. The twins developed distinct personalities. Emma was quiet and thoughtful, always with her nose in a book, while Rose was bold and adventurous, constantly finding new ways to test her parents' patience. When Daniel was 12, Emma and Rose were 10, and Rebecca was 37, she gave birth one more time to a son they named Matthew. He was a surprise baby, arriving a full 15 years after Daniel, and his older siblings doted on him completely. Rebecca sometimes thought about that young woman who had stepped off the train in Wallace all those years ago, so certain that she was damaged and unlovable. That woman seemed like a stranger now. In her place was someone confident and strong, a woman who knew her own worth, who was loved deeply and loved in return. Her scar had faded over the years, becoming just another line on her face among the laugh lines and sung creases that came from a life lived fully. She barely thought about it anymore, except on rare occasions when she caught sight of her reflection, and remembered that girl who had tried to hide in shadows. One summer evening when Rebecca was 43, she and Dalton were sitting on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Daniel was home visiting from the cattle drive he had joined, teaching his younger siblings how to rope a fence post. Matthew, now 6 years old, was trying his best to imitate his big brother while the twins cheered him on. "We did good," Dalton said, reaching for Rebecca's hand. "We did," she agreed. "They are wonderful children." "I was not just talking about the children, I meant us. We built something good here." Rebecca looked around at the ranch that had become her home, at the house that had expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, at the land that stretched out in all directions under the endless Montana sky. She thought about all the moments that had brought them to this point, the struggles and triumphs, the sorrows and joys, the 1,000 tiny acts of love that Dalton had shown her over the course of their marriage. "Yes," she said, "we built something very good." Dalton lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I love you, Rebecca Irving, today, tomorrow, and all the days after that. And I love you, Dalton Irving, always and forever." They sat together as the sun set, their hands intertwined, watching their children laugh and play. In the distance, the mountains stood tall and proud, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and grass. It was a perfect moment, one of thousands they had shared over the years, and Rebecca knew there would be thousands more to come, because she was loved, because she was wanted, because she had found in Dalton Irving a partner who saw her for who she truly was and cherished every part of her. The mail-order bride who thought she was unlovable had discovered that she was, in fact, deeply loved. And the cowboy who had spent every day proving her wrong had become the greatest love of her life. As darkness fell, and the stars began to appear one by one in the vast Montana sky, Rebecca leaned against her husband's shoulder and smiled. This was her life, her family, her happiness. It was everything she had never dared to dream of, and it was real. Years later, when Daniel was married with children of his own and the twins had started families of their own, and Matthew was grown and working the ranch alongside his father, Rebecca and Dalton would sit on that same porch and marvel at the legacy they had built. They had 8 grandchildren by then, with more on the way, and the ranch had expanded to include Daniel's holdings and employed over 20 hands. But more than the land or the cattle or the prosperity they had achieved, what mattered most was the love they had cultivated. It showed in the way their children treated their own spouses with respect and devotion. It showed in how their grandchildren ran to them for hugs and stories. It showed in every corner of the life they had built together. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration that brought together friends and neighbors from all over the territory. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could reasonably eat. Pete and Sarah were there, now with grown children of their own. Dr. Hayes, now retired, made the trip out to the ranch to offer her congratulations. Even some of the original ranch hands who had moved on to other opportunities returned to celebrate with the couple who had become like family to them. As the party went on around them, Dalton pulled Rebecca aside to a quiet corner of the porch. The same porch where they had sat so many evenings over the years, watching sunsets and talking about their dreams and their fears and everything in between. 30 years, he said, shaking his head in wonder. It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. I know what you mean. Rebecca looked out at the crowd of people laughing and celebrating. We have been very blessed, Dalton. More than blessed, I have you. That is more than I ever hoped for. He took both her hands in his. Rebecca, do you remember what I told you on our wedding day? That I would spend my life proving to you that you were loved? I remember. I hope I have kept that promise. I hope you know, deep in your bones, that you are the most important thing in my world, that you always have been and you always will be." Rebecca felt tears well up in her eyes, but they were happy tears. She had cried so many happy tears over the years with this man. "You have more than kept your promise. You have given me a life I never imagined possible. You have loved me so well, Dalton. You taught me how to love myself. You were always worth loving, Rebecca. Every single day, from the moment I first saw you trying to hide that beautiful face in the shadows." He reached up and traced the faded scar with gentle fingers. "You are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I will keep telling you that until the day I die." "I believe you now," she said softly. "It took a while, but I believe you. I know I am loved." They kissed then, surrounded by the sounds of celebration, and Rebecca felt the same flutter in her stomach that she had felt 30 years ago when this cowboy had looked at her and seen past her scars to the woman underneath. He had never wavered, never doubted, never made her feel like she was anything less than precious. That was the true gift Dalton had given her. Not the ranch or the children or the comfortable life, though she was grateful for all of those things. The true gift was showing her that she was worthy of love exactly as she was, that her scars, both visible and invisible, did not define her, that she was enough. As they grew older, they settled into a comfortable routine. Dalton eventually handed over most of the ranch operations to Daniel and Matthew, though he still helped out when he could. Rebecca spent her days tending her garden, teaching her grandchildren to cook and sew, and enjoying the slower pace that came with age. They still had their evenings on the porch, though Dalton needed a cane now and Rebecca's joints ached when it rained. They would sit together, holding hands, and watch the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build into something lasting. "You have any regrets?" Rebecca asked one evening when she was 60 and Dalton was 65. He was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Not a single one. Everything I have done, every choice I have made led me to you, to this life. How could I regret any of it, even the hard times, the losses, even those? They made us who we are. They taught us to appreciate what we have." He squeezed her hand. "What about you? Do you have regrets?" Rebecca thought about the young woman she had been, so convinced of her own unworthiness. She thought about the scar that had once seemed like a curse, but had ultimately led her to the greatest blessing of her life. She thought about all the moments of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle that had filled the years of her marriage. "My only regret," she said finally, "is that I did not believe sooner that I deserved this happiness. But you helped me learn to believe, so even that regret is tempered with gratitude." They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the stars emerge one by one. The night was cool and clear, and somewhere in the distance they could hear their grandchildren playing. "Dalton," Rebecca said after a while. Thank you for answering my letter all those years ago. Thank you for taking a chance on a scared woman with a scar on her face and a heart that did not know how to hope. Thank you for being brave enough to write that letter. Thank you for coming all this way to give an awkward cowboy a chance at love." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had done thousands of times before. "You are my everything, Rebecca Irving. You always have been." As they made their way inside, Dalton helping Rebecca up the porch steps with patient care, Rebecca reflected on the extraordinary life they had built. It had not always been easy. There had been setbacks and heartbreaks along the way. But through it all they had had each other, and that had been enough, more than enough. It had been everything. Years later, when Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Rebecca grieved deeply but without bitterness. They had had 48 wonderful years together. Years filled with more love and joy than most people experienced in several lifetimes. She missed him terribly, missed his steady presence and his gentle humor, and the way he had looked at her every single day like she was the most precious thing in the world. But she did not doubt that she had been loved. Dalton had spent nearly 5 decades proving it to her, and the proof was everywhere she looked. It was in the ranch that bore their name, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried on their legacy. It was in the stories people told about them, about the mail-order bride who had come west expecting nothing and found everything, and the cowboy who had loved her exactly as she was. Rebecca lived for another 12 years after Dalton's death, surrounded by family, still strong and sharp-minded until the very end. When she finally passed away at the age of 80, she was laid to rest beside her husband on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. On her headstone, Daniel had the words engraved that his father had spoken so often. She was loved, she was worthy, she was enough, and she had been. Every single day of her extraordinary life, Rebecca Irving had been exactly enough. The mail-order bride who thought she was unlovable had discovered the greatest love story of all, not because a cowboy had saved her, but because he had helped her save herself. He had shown her that true love was not about being perfect or unblemished. It was about being seen, being valued, and being cherished for exactly who you were. That was the legacy they left behind. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, but a testament to the transformative power of love. The kind of love that heals old wounds and builds new dreams. The kind of love that proves, day after day after day, that everyone is worthy of being loved. And in the end, that was the greatest gift Rebecca and Dalton had given each other. Not just a life together, but the unshakable knowledge that they were both deserving of every moment of happiness they had shared. The mail-order bride had found her home, and the cowboy had found his heart, and together they had built something that would endure long after they were gone. Their story became legend in Wallace, Montana, passed down through generations. People spoke of the woman with the scarred face who had come west on a leap of faith, and the man who had loved her so completely that he changed her entire world. Young couples would visit their graves and make promises to love each other as fully and faithfully as Dalton and Rebecca had, because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the obstacles they had overcome or the prosperity they had achieved, but the simple, profound truth that they had loved each other well. They had built a life on a foundation of mutual respect, daily kindness, and unwavering devotion. And that life had been, in every way that mattered, extraordinary. Rebecca Keller had boarded a train in Philadelphia in 1880, certain that she was unlovable and unworthy. Rebecca Irving left this world in 1912, secure in the knowledge that she had been deeply, profoundly loved. And the cowboy who had spent every day proving her wrong had, in the process, given her the greatest gift of all, the ability to finally, completely, love herself.